What's up guys, Ben here bringing you another video today. We did an episode of The Flank yesterday. I'm recording this on the 11th of October. We did a episode on the 10th, which was a Monday. We did our version of the tier list on the show once again. I'm going to react to it and give you kind of my additional thoughts on how we kind of place some of these teams where I think I have some disagreements and then go from there. So let's dive in. All right, so I recreated the tier list here from our video yesterday. If you haven't checked out our show from last night, I'm recording this the day after. We'll link that in the description for you. Go take a look. It was, as always, a very entertaining episode of The Flank. People always love me and Pat arguing, man, and there are some good ones in this one, so if you want to tune in and check that out, go ahead. So let's start at the top and I'll give you my thoughts. S tier, we have Thieves and FaZe. I think for me, the only tweak I might do here is putting OpTic in S tier. We had a whole argument about it last time we did a tier list last season. We had a whole argument about is OpTic S or A, and I think this one's always kind of interesting in regards to OpTic. I personally think potential wise they are an S tier team, but I understand with the difficulties from last season and the perception around the team in terms of their vibes and what happened in the off season and did they like teaming with each other. You might want to put them in A. I mean, they did get 4th at champs, so it's not like they really bombed out at the end of the season. Personally, for me, I will put them in S tier. I think they're going to have a good start to the season. Where I think they might struggle might be sort of post New Year's, but I think in terms of like grinding and getting ahead for the first event, I'd put them in S. Thieves and FaZe are no brainers though in S though. I think Pat was trying to argue last night that Thieves maybe doesn't belong in S. That's ridiculous. They're the defending champs. They had the best teamwork at the end of last season. Could they have a slow start to the season? Sure, but I think based on that merit alone, how they dominated the end of the year, they gotta be in S. FaZe obviously has been in the grand finals of CDL champs every single year, so us not putting them in S probably is would not be good work from us. I think they're definitely gonna be there or thereabouts. And they've obviously swapped out Alec for Slasher, and I think that was an interesting change, and maybe will probably improve their search, which I think was one of the areas they really struggled with at points last season. They weren't a bad search team, but when they played sort of the team that was the hottest at the tournament, they were not able to overcome a hot team in that game mode like they were able to deal with at times in the Cold War season. So looking for FaZe to improve there. So yeah, that's my S tier thoughts, and OpTic as well. And for me, I'd put them in S, but again, we put them top A, which I think is just as fair. So next we got the Seattle Surge in A. I think this one's a fair placement. I was surprised when we did the show that people weren't trying to argue Seattle in like B or C tier and just try and say they're going to super regress. I personally think that Seattle may kind of slide in these standings when the season starts. I think Pat made the point in the show. He loves this, to use his zombies phrase, pack a punch. He thinks that Seattle missed an opportunity to upgrade. I think the way that roster mania really went down, I don't really know if there was a player that they could have gotten that I think would have really have improved the team over accuracy, maybe from more skill, sure. But I think a lot of what makes Seattle, I think is sort of the emotions those players wear in their sleeve. And I think Lamar is a good balance to all of that. And look, they're a really young team, and that emotion has come with inconsistencies as time throughout the season. But their ceiling as a team is incredible. I mean, they won an event last year. They obviously then struggled sort of after that event, but they came to champs and really like the only teams that they weren't really able to beat were the teams that you got into the finals. Obviously, they did a really good job against OpTic. So I'm high on the Seattle team, but a lot of other teams got better. I think they could regress. I think putting them any lower than A would have been, I would have had a problem with that. Let's just say that. All right, so here's where I tried to argue last night and got shot down. We have Toronto in A and Minnesota in B tier. My personal thoughts, first off, is I think Minnesota is better than Toronto. So if we're going to rank them, put them ahead. And if we're going to put them in tiers, I think they should be in the same tier. I got shot down by everybody. They're like, oh, well, I'll give you their arguments. It's like, oh, well, you know, I think Scrappy is going to be really good. And I think that Minnesota is a worse version of Toronto last year. Those were pretty much the main excuses I heard last night. Couple of thoughts. First off, I think the first event, every time we've had these December events in past years of Call of Duty, and we haven't had one December event in a minute, it's been a lot about getting ahead, being disciplined, maximizing your practice. And then once you go to that first event and you kind of know where your weaknesses are, you get that time to really improve and start to really work on your issues while other teams sort of catch up if you're ahead. And I think Minnesota is more positioned well for that than Toronto. And I think for a couple of reasons. One is Minnesota has a coaching staff. I do not know know at this moment, with Marky B heading off to LAG, with Ben Vance obviously on Minnesota, who's the IGL of this team? Who is the coach? Like, who's their analyst? Like, these are questions that I don't think have been answered yet about Toronto. So I'm a little worried with them on that front. They're just a worse version of Toronto claim. Well, that Toronto team was placed in top 4 last year, even when they were quote, like, not good. So I feel like putting Minnesota in, like, if we're going to rank these teams in 5th would be an assessment based on that. My issue with Toronto is I do think skill-wise they're up there with Minnesota. I'm a little worried that the Standy Kleenex duo might be sort of a little bit of a rough one in the beginning. I think role-wise it sort of makes sense, but you know, I'm just worried that this Toronto team is lacking a lot of that like tools in the toolbox to really get ahead early. I think they're a nasty skilled team, but I would think based on sort of what Minnesota's bringing with Attach and Cammy and Vance and Afro, with you got 3 good veterans and they're really going to kind of give Afro that sort of next level teaching and approach. Like, I think Minnesota's well more suited to start off the season better than Toronto. So that's my one big disagreement with this, I think. Next up, we got New York and Boston in the B tier. I think you could swap these two teams in any order you want. I think that's a fair placement. I think New York, just like Minnesota and Toronto, have made some big moves, but I think unlike Minnesota and Toronto, I think I have way more questions about the New York camp and their team than I do about the other two squads. I think this New York team's floor to ceiling is a big gap. They could be really, really good, just absolutely probably the 3rd or 4th best team in the league. They could also be probably like they were last season, where they're 11th to 10th, maybe the worst team in the league at times. It's just hard to tell. I think Hydra's nasty. I think he's top 3, top 5 SMG in the game, depending on how you want to look at it. I like how Kismet played at the end of the season, and obviously got Skies and Priest are coming in. It's just a funky team to me. And I think, like, again, with New York, they don't have the best internal culture as we've seen over the years. So if they can learn from that lesson and start the season off correct and really grind their practice and take it seriously and not bitch and moan, this could be a really good team. Or it could be like the past New York teams of every single year of Call of Duty, where they really struggle in the beginning and they don't really get it on until the middle of the season and they're already behind the 8 ball. So that's some of my thoughts on that squad, which is why I think if I had to kind of gun to my head pick, would I put Boston over New York? I think I'm probably taking Boston. I like the change they made. You know, Big Wake, obviously, I think as a teammate and some other stuff, definitely has some room to grow, but I think he's going into a better atmosphere now in Boston, and I can really step them up on the skill level. I mean, you look at the squad of Awakening, Vivid, Nero Poison, and Zinni, aka Methods, and I like this sort of crack trio right there. It's really, really quick, and it reminds me a lot of sort of the early year of Thieves. They can really kind of gel in their system and the teamwork. Like, they're going to be aggressive enough to frustrate a team like Atlanta FaZe. And I think that's an important thing for Boston, because as I mentioned on the show last night, and I think they acknowledged that their shortcoming last season was they were solid against decent teams in the league. But the minute they played a Thieves or a FaZe, they were nowhere to be found, and they couldn't really match up with those teams. That's where they need to take a step as a squad. If they're another year of, we're just a top 6, top 8 team, we can really take care of business, make sure we always get a top seed for events, but the minute that we get to top 4, top 6, and we play a better team, we just crumble. Like, that's not the development I'm looking for the squad. I think they can do it with that team. I think it's interesting that they're bringing in Beans, but I don't think that they are more likely than Toronto or Minnesota to really vault in that top 4 spot. So I think putting them in B tier is fair for me. And I don't think there was any contention really from the squad last night. I think we all felt pretty good about this B tier, other than the Toronto Minnesota thing, but I've already spoken about that. C tier, not that surprising. LAG and London. I think the entire show is really sort of glass half empty about this Los Angeles Guerrillas team. This is probably our cleanest conversation last night. Like, I think we all love Alec and what he brings. I just think none of us are convinced that the trio of Spartan, Neptune, and Hook is just going to be a really good sort of run it back squad. Like, they got plenty of time last year, and it didn't really work out. I'm a little worried that, yeah, there's skill there, but just the decision making and the awareness is just really finicky with that squad. And I feel like Alec is going to go from a FaZe team where they don't necessarily have that problem with all of the players to a team where maybe 2 to 3 of them really have that issue. And I feel like it's going to frustrate him a lot. They could be really, really good. This LAG team could be pulling up to the first event and being absolutely filthy takeover team, where they could legitimately be the worst team in the league. They have the widest floor to ceiling. of any team in the league. And I think C, considering that I think some teams are probably more positioned better for a start, I think putting them in LEG and C is probably fair. I don't think this LEG team is going to make it more than an event or two right now. We could be proven wrong about this. I know the LEG squad's probably watching this video. Like, it's just hard for me to put them over Toronto and Minnesota and New York and Boston, who I think like have higher floors. I don't know, man. I just have PTSD from this org. That's sort of my issue. So I hope they figure it out. London and C is fair. Kind of a sort of new squad with Paul and Asim coming over to join Zero and Nasty. I think it's an interesting squad of people and players that are also wildly inconsistent. Just like LEG, like they could be just like the London team last year, pulling up to the first event and getting top 4, and you can, you know, discount their run or whatever, but they're going to be a capable squad. Or they could be really struggling, losing to like your Floridas of the world, because just on a given day, you're not sure what you're going to get from the team. I'm really going to be watching this team early and see what kind of practice they get and how they start off the season. And by the way, I've heard Scraps is on the bench for the squad. So you could see a role where maybe we run back to FaZe, Black Ops 4 squad from the end of the season. And I think D tier is fair. You got Florida and Vegas. I almost said Paris there. Good thing I stopped myself. I think we all kind of like the Florida squad. I just think with Florida, again, the same problem as like London is talent. I like the players. The team makes sense. Are they more talented than the other teams? I don't think so. Could they outperform some of the other teams? Absolutely. I think there's a lot of parity in the league. On paper, they're not as good as, say, a squad like Seattle. I think where Florida could excel is in search and getting ahead early and really understanding the meta. But I could see this Florida team starting off well and then fading. But I'm excited to see Brack in the league. I'm excited to see my boy Vickle. He's a Madrid fan, so I'm sure he's cheesing about this Mbappe news this morning. I think, actually, I'm really going to like watching some of the content around this Florida team. They've got some funny personalities. This is sort of a squad. I'm really rooting for this Florida squad to do well, personally. I think it would be great to see them prove a lot of people, including myself, wrong. But I think based on the sort of arguments I've outlined here, I think we got to put them in D. Now, obviously, you got the boys on Vegas. We had a whole argument last night. My personal thought was like, I would have liked to have seen, at least for the first event, Clay, Temp, Jimbo, and Johnny. I think the show thought I was wildly crazy for that. I'm sure some of y'all think I'm off the henny on that one, so to speak. My problem with Vegas is like, I just look at Proloot and TJ as a potential sub duo, and I stack them up against some of the other teams, and it just, at that point, I would rather just run it back with your sort of challengers players from the season prior. And if it works, great. You know, they sort of developed, they had an off season, they got it. If not, we just swap out, because you're going to do the same with this team anyway. Bro, the way this Vegas team's going to go down, I can already tell, is you got Temp and Clay in there, strong personalities. They're going to not agree on everything. There's going to be really sort of tough arguments within the team early on, and the vibes are just going to be chalked. For me, and I've been pretty kind of sort of out there with this sort of organization, is like, I just want to see them commit to a game plan. An obvious one, if you knew you were going to whiff on every free agent you try to sign. And, you know, to Temp's credit, like, he was out there trying to recruit anyone he could to join the squad. You know, they don't offer competitive salaries compared to other teams. And so it was tough for him to recruit people. I don't dislike the squad they built. I'm just, my issue is I just think they have both the skill disparity and sort of the missing pieces internal to really kind of get ahead of other teams. And if they pull up to the first event, they don't get out of groups, like, phew, man. So that's my issue with Vegas, and that's why I think you got to put them rock bottom. But the league's got so much parity, like, I wouldn't be surprised if Vegas pulled up and got a rando top 8 of this tournament. That wouldn't surprise me. I just think they have significantly less tools than some of the other teams. So yeah, that's my reaction to this overall tier list from the flank. I think the only big change that I would have made if this was my list is probably swapping Minnesota and Toronto and maybe jumbling for the A and B thing. I would have probably put OpTic in S tier, but we can agree to disagree on that one. So yeah, let me know in the comments what y'all think of the video. I'm sure you guys have thoughts on my Vegas take from last night, so let me hear it in the comments. Like the video as always. If you enjoyed the content, subscribe to the channel. We'll keep pumping out content for you as we get ready for the season to start. I'm super excited. And as always, guys, we will see you on the next one.